This book contains up to 4 sides per cassette. Side 1, The Broken Bubble by Philip K. Dick. Copyright 1988 by the estate of Philip K. Dick. Narrated by David Hartley Margolin. This book contains 246 pages on 7 sides. If you would like to skip over any remaining announcements or introductory material, place your cassette player and fast forward until a beep is heard. Stop at that point to hear the beginning of the book. Annotation. Set in San Francisco in the 1950s, amidst the rise of rock and roll, the story centers around disc jockey Jim Briskin and his ex-wife, Pat. They become deeply involved in the lives of a married teenage couple, and Jim sees himself as something of a father figure for the young pair. 1988. From the book jacket. Philip K. Dick, the world-famous science fiction writer who died in 1982, was unable to obtain publication for the body of his fiction outside the genre. Since his death, however, a number of small presses have printed, and sold out, various of his unpublished works. Then Arbor House released his novel Mary and the Giant in 1987, and garnered such comments as, "Philip K. Dick's magic time machine ride into the 1950s is just as amazing as his science fiction excursions into the future, Ed Bryant. And, as enigmatic as a Beckett play, and at the same time as rooted in real life as a Steinbeck novel, Mary and the Giant is a weirdly compelling story, Tim Powers. And, boy, that guy was good, Susie McKee Charnas." Now Arbor House is proud to present The Broken Bubble, new and complete, for the first time anywhere, by arrangement with the estate of Philip K. Dick. Excitement has been building as the unpublished works of this intriguing writer have continued to appear, with increasingly widespread review attention and a steadily growing cult audience. And this is just the book to satisfy his fans and hook new readers. The Broken Bubble is a novel of San Francisco in the 1950s, about the unusual events that mix up and entwine the lives of 4 people at a turning point in American culture: the rise of rock and roll and the teenage lifestyle. Jim Briskin is a disc jockey on radio KOIF. He's still in love with his ex-wife, Pat, even though she's about to marry someone else at the station, and she's vacillating between them. But when he takes her to visit the desperate household of 2 of his teenage fans, she seduces the boy into abandoning his pregnant wife, who then claims Jim as her protector and support. And all around them, the cultural upheaval of post-war American society is manifest, by teenage outcasts who have a remote-controlled Nazi automobile they use to bump into the rich kids' cars. By Thisbe Holt, the dancer who performs for conventioneers by stuffing herself inside a clear plastic bubble. By blaring used car ads and the conflict between generations. The solution to this human muddle is a literary triumph equaling in power Dick's finest novels. Dick gives us a vision of redemption tempered with layered ironies and a lot of real humor. The Broken Bubble now takes its place beside the other major works of this fine writer. About the author. Philip K. Dick was considered by many to be the greatest living author of science fiction. His work won many awards, including the Hugo Award for Best Novel. Other books by Philip K. Dick. The Best of Philip K. Dick. The Book of Philip K. Dick. Clans of the Alphane Moon. The Collected Stories of Philip K. Dick. Confessions of a Crap Artist. The Cosmic Puppets. Counterclock World. The Crack in Space. Deus Irae, with Roger Zelazny. The Divine Invasion. Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? Dr. Blood Money. Dr. Futurity. Eye in the Sky. Flow My Tears, the Policeman Said. Galactic Pot Healer. The Game Players of Titan. The Ganymede Takeover, with Ray Nelson. The Golden Man. A Handful of Darkness. Humpty Dumpty in Oakland. I Hope I Shall Arrive Soon. In Milton Lumpke territory. The Man in the High Castle. The Man Who Japed. The Man Whose Teeth Were All Exactly Alike. Martian Time Slip. A Maze of Death. Now Wait for Last Year. Our Friends from Frolics 8. The Penultimate Truth. The Preserving Machine. Puttering About in a Small Land. Radio-Free Albemuth. Robots, Androids, and Mechanical Oddities. A Scanner Darkly. The Simulacra. Solar Lottery. The Three Stigmata of Palmer Eldritch. Time Out of Joint. The Transmigration of Timothy Archer. Ubik. Ubik, Screenplay. The Unteleported Man. Valis. The Variable Man. Vulcan's Hammer. We Can Build You. The World Jones Made. The Zap Gun. The Broken Bubble. 1. Luke trades big. Summer is here, and Luke is mighty ready to make a deal with you. Mighty ready. At 3 big lots. All of them busting with cars, cars, cars. What do you think your old car is worth? Maybe it's worth more than you think on a brand new Plymouth, or Chevrolet four-door sedan, or a Ford Custom Deluxe Ranch wagon. Luke is trading big these days, buying big and selling big. Luke thinks big. Luke is big. Before Luke came, this wasn't much of a town. Now it's a really big car town. Now everybody drives a brand new DeSoto with power windows, power seat. Come see Luke. Luke was born in Oklahoma before he moved out here to great old sunny California. Luke moved out here in 1946, after we beat the Japs. Listen to that sound truck that's going up and down the streets. Listen to it go. It goes all the time. It pulls that big red signboard along, and all the time it's playing the Too Fat Polka and saying, regardless of the make or condition of your old car. Hear that? It don't matter what kind of old heap you got. Luke will give you $200 for it if you can drag, walk, tow, push it into the lot. Luke wears a straw hat. He wears a double-breasted gray suit, and he wears crepe-soled shoes. In his coat pocket, he carries 3 fountain pens and 2 ballpoint pens. Inside his coat is an official blue book. Luke takes it out and tells you what your heap is worth. Look at that hot California sun pouring over Luke. Look at his big face sweat. Look at him grin. When Luke grins, he slips $20 into your pocket. Luke gives away money. This is Automobile Row. This is the street of cars. Van Ness Avenue, San Francisco. Windows on all sides, all along and up and down. Glass with words written in red and white poster paint. Banners are pasted up high and flags flutter, and over some lots are wads of colored aluminum strung on wire. And there are balloons and, in the evening, lights. At night the chains go up, the cars are locked, but lights come on. Fine spotlights, fine big beams of color frying the bugs. And Luke has his clowns, his painted lady and gent clowns. They stand on top of the building and wave their arms. Luke has his microphones, and the salesmen call to people. Free quart of oil, free dish, free candy and cap gun for the kids. The steel guitar sings, and how Luke likes that. It sings like home. Bob Posen, holding his initial briefcase, wondered if he had been recognized as a salesman, which in fact he was. He put out his hand saying, I'm Bob Posen, from radio station KOIF, station manager. He was now at Looney Luke's used car lot, trying to sell airtime. Yeah, Sharpstein said, picking his teeth with a silver toothpick. He wore gray slacks and a lemon-yellow shirt. Like all the West Coast used car dealers, his skin was baked red and dry, flaky around his nose. "We were wondering when we'd hear from you." They meandered among the cars. "Nice-looking cars you have here," Posen said. "All clean," Sharpstein said. "Every one a clean car." "Are you Luke?" "Yeah, I'm Luke." "You thinking of doing anything over the air?" That was the big question. Rubbing his cheekbone, Sharpstein said, "What sort of coverage your station got?" He gave an estimate twice the actual size. In these times he was willing to say anything. Television was getting the accounts, and nothing was left now but Regal pale beer and L&M filter cigarettes. The independent AM stations were in a bad fix. "We've been having a few spots on TV," Sharpstein said. "Works out pretty good, but they sure cost." "And why pay for coverage of the whole Northern California area when your customers are right here in San Francisco?" He had a talking point there. Station KOIF, with its 1,000 watts of operating power, reached as many people in San Francisco as did the network AM and TV stations, and at a fraction of the cost. They strolled to the car lot office. At the desk, Posen scratched figures on a pad of paper. "Sounds good to me," Sharpstein said, his arms behind his head, his foot up on the desk. "Now, tell me something. I have to admit I never got around to hearing your station. You got some kind of schedule I can see?" KOIF went on the air at 5:45 a.m. with news and weather and Sons of the Pioneers records. "Yep," Sharpstein said. Then 5 hours of popular music. Then noon news. Then 2 hours of popular music from records and transcriptions. Then Club 17, the kids' rock and roll show, until 5. Then an hour of Spanish-language light opera and talk and accordion music. Then dinner music from 6 until 8. Then, in other words, Sharpstein said, the usual stuff. Balanced programming. Music, news, sports, and religious, plus spot plugs. That was what kept the station alive. "What about this?" Sharpstein said. "How about a plug every half hour between 8 a.m. and 11 p.m.? 31-minute spots a day, 7 days a week." Posen's mouth fell open. "Jesus Christ." "I'm serious," Sharpstein said. Sweat fell from Posen's arms into his nylon shirt. "Let's see what that would run." He wrote figures. What a bundle! Sweat stung his eyes. Sharpstein examined the figures. "Looks okay. It'll be tentative, of course. We'll try it a month and see what kind of response there is. We haven't been satisfied with the Examiner ads." "Nobody reads that," Posen said hoarsely. Wait, he thought, until Ted Haynes, the owner of KOIF, was informed. "I'll do your material myself. I'll handle the material personally." "You mean write it?" "Yes," he said. "Anything. Everything." Sharpstein said, "We'll supply the material. It comes from Kansas City, from the big boys. We're part of a chain. You just put it on the air." Radio station KOIF was located on narrow, steep Geary Street in downtown San Francisco, on the top floor of the McLaughlin Building. The McLaughlin Building was a drafty, antiquated wooden office building with a couch in the lobby. There was an elevator, an iron cage, but the station employees usually went up by the stairs. The door from the stairs opened onto a hallway. To the left was the front office of KOIF, with one desk, a mimeograph machine, typewriter, telephone, and 2 wooden chairs. To the right was the glass window of the control room. The wide board floor was unpainted. The ceilings, high above, were yellowed plaster, cobwebbed. Several offices were used as storerooms. Toward the back, away from the traffic noises, were the studios. The smaller of the two was the recording studio, and the other, with more adequate soundproof doors and walls, was for broadcasting. In the broadcast studio was a grand piano. A corridor divided the station into 2 sections. The corridor cut off from the main offices a large room in which was an oak table on which were piles of folded and unfolded mailouts, envelopes, cartons, like the workroom of a campaign headquarters. And next to that, the room in which the transmitter controls were located, the board itself, a swinging mic, 2 Presto turntables, upright record cabinets, a supply cabinet on the door of which was tacked a photograph of Eartha Kitt, And, of course, there was a bathroom, and a carpeted lounge for visitors, and a closet in which to hang coats or hats, and to store brooms. A door at the back of the studio corridor opened onto the roof. A catwalk led past chimneys and skylights to a flight of shaky wooden stairs that connected with the fire escape. The roof door was unlocked. Occasionally, station employees stepped out onto the catwalk for a smoke. The time was 1:30 in the afternoon, and KOIF was transmitting songs by the crew cuts. Bob Posen had brought in the signed contract with Looney Luke Automotive Sales and had gone out again. At her desk in the front office, Patricia Gray typed bills from the accounts receivable file. In the control room, Frank Hubble, one of the station announcers, leaned back in his chair and talked on the telephone. The music of the crew cuts from the PM speaker boxed in the upper corner of the wall filled the office. The stair doors opened, and another announcer entered, a tall, thin, rather worried-looking man wearing a loose-fitting coat. Under his arm was a load of records. "Hi," he said. Patricia stopped typing and said, "Have you been listening to the station?" "No." Preoccupied, Jim Briskin searched for a place to put down his records. "Some Looney Luke material arrived. Hubble and Flannery have been giving it off and on. Some of it's recorded and some isn't." A slow smile spread across his face. He had a long, horse-like face, and the overgrown jaw that many announcers seemed to have. His eyes were pale, mild. His hair was brownish-gray and beginning to recede. "What's that?" "The used car lot, up on Van Ness." His mind was on the afternoon programming. He was planning out Club 17, his program, his 3 hours of tunes and talk for the kids. "How is it?" he said. "It's just awful." She put a page of material before him. Balancing his records against his hip, he read the typed pages. "Will you call Haynes and read this stuff to him? Bob called him and slurred over. He just talked about the income." "Be quiet," he said, reading. 1A. The car you buy today from Looney Luke will be a clean car, and it will stay clean. Looney Luke guarantees it. 2A. Echo. Clean, clean, clean. 1A. A clean car, clean upholstery, a clean deal from Looney Luke, the volume car dealer who outsells in big volume sales all other car dealers in the Bay Area. 2A. Echo. Sells, sells, sells. Instructions on the script called for the announcer to record the echo parts in advance. The counterpoint was his own voice, knocking against itself. "So?" he said. It seemed routine to him, the usual used car pitch. Pat said, "But that's yours, for the dinner music stretch, between the Romeo and Juliet overture." She looked at the evening programming. "And till Eulenspiegel." Picking up the phone, Jim dialed Ted Haynes's home number. Presently, Haynes's measured voice was heard saying, "Who is calling?" "This is Jim Briskin," he said. "On your phone or the station phone?" "Tell him about the laugh," Pat said. "What?" he said, putting his hand over the mouthpiece of the phone. And then he remembered the laugh. The laugh was Looney Luke's trademark. The sound truck carried it about town, and the loudspeakers in the illuminated towers of the car lot blasted it at the cars and pedestrians. It was a crazed laugh, a funhouse laugh. It went around and around, rising and falling, getting down into the belly in a slowed-down manner, and then shooting up into the sinuses. All at once, a sharp laugh, very shrill, a giggle. The laugh bubbled and simpered. Something was wrong with it, something terrible and basic. The laugh became hysterical. Now it could not contain itself. It burst frothily, fragmenting itself. Collapsing, the laugh sank down, winded, gasping, exhausted by the ordeal. And then, dragging in deep breaths, it started over. On and on it went, 15 hours without let-up, rolling out above the shiny Fords and Plymouths, over the Negro in knee boots who washed the cars, over the salesmen in their pastel suits, over the flat lots, the office buildings, the downtown business district of San Francisco, and ultimately over the residential sections, over the apartment houses with their single walls joining them in rows, over the new concrete houses near the beach, over all the houses and all the stores, all the people in the town. "Mr. Haynes," he said, "I have some Looney Luke material here for the dinner music program. This stuff isn't going to go over, not with the kind of audience I have. The old ladies out by the park don't buy used cars, and they turn this stuff off as fast as they can get to the radio. And—" "I see your point," Haynes said, "but it's my understanding that Posen agreed to air Sharpstein's material straight across the board each half hour. And anyhow, Jim, this is in the nature of an experiment." "Okay," he said, "but when we're through, we won't have any old ladies or any other sponsors. And by that time, Luke will have dumped his 90 carloads of 55 Hudsons or whatever it is he's pushing. And then what? You suppose he's going to keep this stuff up after he breaks the back of the other lots? This is just to knock them off." "You have a point," Haynes said. "Darn right I have. I suppose Posen bid on this." "Afraid so." Haynes said, "Well, we've signed the contract. Let's go ahead and finish out our commitment to Sharpstein, and then in the future we'll be more wary of this sort of thing." "But," Jim said, "you mean you want me to go ahead and give this on the dinner music? Listen to this." He reached for the script. Pat handed it to him. "I know how it reads," Haynes said. "I've caught it on the other independents. But I feel, considering the signed contract, we're really obliged to go ahead with it. It would be bad business to back out." Jim said, "Mr. Haynes, this will kill us." It would kill sponsorship of the classical music anyhow. The little restaurants who supported classical music would back off, would vanish. "Let's give it a try and see," Haynes said, with a tone of judgment. "Okay, boy? Maybe it'll work out to the good. After all, this is currently our heaviest advertising account. You must take the long-term view. Now, perhaps a few of those little fancy restaurants will act huffy for a while, but they'll be back. Right, boy?" They argued a little longer, but in the end, Jim gave up and said goodbye. "Thanks for calling me," Haynes said. "I'm glad you feel you want to discuss this sort of problem with me, out in the open where we can talk about it." Putting the phone down, Jim said, "Luke's cars are clean cars." "It's on, then?" Patricia said. He took the script into the recording studio and began putting the 2A echo part onto tape. Then he switched on the other Ampex and taped 1A also, and combined both, so that at program time he had only to start the transport going. When he had finished, he rewound the tape and played it back. From the speakers, his own professional announcer's voice said, "The car you buy today from Looney Luke." While it played, he read over his mail. The first cards were requests from kids for current pop tunes, which he clipped to his continuity for the afternoon. Then a complaint from a businessman, a practical, outgoing individual protesting that too much chamber music was being played on the dinner music program. Then a sweet note from a very gentle little old lady named Edith Holcomb, who lived out in Stonestown, saying how much she enjoyed the lovely music and how glad she was that the station was keeping it alive. Blood for his veins, he thought, putting her letter where he could refer to it. Something to show the advertisers. On went the struggle. 5 years of work, keeping up the pretense that this was his interest in life. He was devoting himself to this, to his music and programs, his cause. From the doorway, Pat said, "You going to play the Fantastic Symphony tonight?" "I thought so." She entered the room and seated herself across from him in the comfortable armchair. Light flashed, a spark of yellow, as she lit a cigarette with her lighter. A present from him given 3 years ago. Her legs rustled as she crossed them, smoothed her skirt. At one time she had been his wife. A few trivialities still connected them. The Berlioz Symphony was one. An old favorite, and when he heard it, the whole background swam up. Smells, tastes, and the rustle, as now of her skirt. She liked long, heavy, colorful skirts and wide belts, and the kind of sleeveless blouse that reminded him of the chemises of the girls on the covers of historical novels. Her hair, too, was that flowing, uncombed mass, dark, soft, and always amiably in her way. Actually, she was not large. She weighed exactly 111 pounds. Her bones were small. Hollow, she had once informed him. Like a flying squirrel's. There had been a number of such similes tying them together. When he remembered, he was vaguely embarrassed. Their tastes did not basically differ, and it was not on that account that the marriage had collapsed. The inside story he kept to himself, hoping that she had done the same. As office gossip, it would have yielded indefinite harvest. They had wanted kids right away, and plenty of them, and when no kids appeared, they had consulted specialists and discovered, lo, that he, of the two of them, was sterile. But that had not been as bad as the next part, which involved Pat's desire to locate what was ingenuously called a donor. The bickering over that had split them up. In all seriousness, but with overtones of self-contempt and rage, he had suggested that she get herself a lover. An affair with emotional involvement had seemed more acceptable to him than the science fiction device of artificial insemination. Or, he had suggested, why not simple adoption? But the donor idea intrigued her. His theory, and it had not gone over well with Pat, was that she yearned for parthenogenesis, and so they had gradually lost any real understanding of each other. Now, glancing up at her, he saw this attractive woman. She was still not over 27 or 28, and made out as easily as ever the qualities that had excited him in the first place. She had a genuine feminineness about her, not merely a daintiness or a diminutiveness, or even a gracefulness. Those were present, but in addition he recognized in her a basically active spirit. Across from him, Pat said in a low voice, "Do you know what this loony loop business means? It means the end of your classical music. He'll want oaky music, steel guitars, Roy Acuff. You'll be squeezed out. The old ladies won't listen. The restaurants won't keep on with us. And you—" "I know," he said. "And you're not going to do anything?" "I did what I could," he said. "I made my gesture." She arose and put out her cigarette. "The phone," she said. In a sweep, a flow of color, she passed him. The brightness of her blouse brushed by. Buttons, too, at the center. How odd, he thought. Once, with his love for her, he had been on the proper track, a good husband. Now, if the idea came to him, it was a sin, and the act itself was unthinkable. Time and intimacy, the incongruity of life. He watched her go, feeling lonely, feeling that perhaps he did not have the answers even yet. The principle of expectation in him yet was this model, this standard of judgment. They had been divorced for 2 years, and in that time he had not seen anyone who could equal her. I hang around her, he thought. I still have to be somewhere nearby. Returning to his records and letters, he prepared notes for his dinner music program. 2. At 5 in the afternoon, his program of popular music and talk for teenagers ended. Usually, he went across the street and ate dinner in a booth in the back of the cafe, with his script beside him, his notes and ideas for the dinner music program. On this July afternoon, as he finished Club 17, he noticed before the glass window of the studio a group of teenage kids standing, peering at him. Lifting his hand, he made a motion of recognition. The kids had been in before. The boy with glasses, wearing a sweater and brown pants and carrying a binder and schoolbooks, was Ferda Heinke, president of a science fiction fan club called The Beings from Earth. Next to him stood Joe Mantilla, very dark and squat, like a troll. Joe's shiny black hair oozed oil down his cheeks and neck, down his bumpy flesh to the cultivated fur of his mustache. Beside Joe was Art and Rachael, wearing a white cotton shirt and jeans. He was a good-looking blond kid with a sturdy face, blue eyes, and great laborer's arms. The first two were still in school, at Galileo High, and Art and Rachael, a year older, was out of school and apprenticed, he had told Jim, to a printer, an old man named Mr. Larson, who had a shop on Eddy Street and who did wedding announcements and business cards and, occasionally, tracts for fundamentalist Negro religious sects. He was a bright, fast-voiced kid who, when excited, talked with a stammer. Jim liked all three of them. Now, as he left the studio and walked toward them, he thought how important this was to him, this contact with the kids. Hey, Art said. That was a cool show, you know? Thanks, he said. The three kids shuffled shyly. We gotta go, Joe Mantilla said. We gotta get home. How about playing not so much of that sentimental big band stuff, Ferda said. More combo, maybe. You coming, Joe Mantilla said to him. I'll drive you. Two of them, Ferda and Joe, went off. Art remained. He seemed unusually keyed up. He stood first on one foot and then the other. Remember that time, he said, when you let us sit in the control room when you were doing the show? His face lit up. That was cool. Jim said, I'm going across the street and eat. You want to come along and have a cup of coffee with me? Sometimes kids trailed along with him, asking him questions about radio and music, this and that. He enjoyed their company at dinner. They kept him from feeling lonely. Glancing around, Art said, My wife's with me. She wants to meet you. She always listens to your show. Your what? My wife, Art said. I didn't know you had a wife, Jim said. It had never occurred to him that this 18-year-old boy, just out of high school, earning $50 a month, might be married. He had taken it for granted that Art lived with his family in an upstairs room with model airplanes and school pennants stuck up on the walls. Sure, he said. I'd like to meet her. Art's wife was in the station's carpeted lounge. This is my wife, Art said, blushing, and with his hand touching the girl on the shoulder. The girl wore a maternity dress. Except at her waist, she was exceptionally thin. Her hair was clipped short, ragged. She wore neither makeup nor stockings. On her feet were flat slippers. She drooped as she waited, and her face was expressionless. She had a narrow, somewhat small nose. Her eyes were striking. The pupils were quite dark, and she gazed in an absorbed, preoccupied way, seeing off into space. She was a rather undernourished-looking girl, but he could not get over her eyes. They certainly were majestic. Hi, he said. Her name is Rachel, Art said. The girl was still staring down at the floor. On her forehead was a frown. Then she glanced up at him solemnly. She reminded him of Patricia. Both of them were small-boned. Both had an unkempt animal-like toughness. Of course, he realized this girl was no more than 17. Art said, Rachel here listens to your show all the time. She's home in the afternoon after she works, fixing dinner. She wanted to come up and meet you. To the girl, Jim said, Can I buy you a cup of coffee? Oh, no, she said. Thanks. Come on, he said. Across the street with me while I eat dinner. It's on me. After a glance at each other, they followed. Neither of them had much to say. They were docile but withdrawn, as if a part of their minds was uncommitted. In the booth, he faced them across his plate of veal chops, his coffee cup, his salad, and silverware. Neither Art nor Rachel wanted anything. They sat close together with their hands out of sight. The cafe was noisy and active. The counter was jammed with diners, and all the booths were filled. When's the baby due? He asked Rachel. In January. You have room? He asked. You've got a place for it? We have this apartment out on Fillmore, Rachel said, down in the basement. How many bedrooms? One, she said, and a kitchen and living room. How long have you been married? He asked her. Since April 14th, Rachel said. We got married up in Santa Rosa. We sort of ran off. You know? I was still in high school, and they didn't think we should get married. We told the license woman we were older. I said I was 18, and I wrote a note. I said, he's 21. She smiled. Art said, she signed the note with my mother's name. We used to get out of school that way, Rachel said, and then we'd walk around town or just sit in the park, Golden Gate Park. My handwriting looks good. She put her hands on the table, and he was conscious of the long, bony fingers. Mature fingers, he thought. Grown-up hands. And, Art said, the sheriff, he was the best man. He even had a gun on, Rachel said. I sort of thought maybe he might do something to us. take us back. Afterward, he came over and shook hands with Art. And the judge said, "If we didn't have $5 to pay him," Rachel said, "we didn't have to. But we did. We hitchhiked up. We stayed there that night with a girl I knew at her house. We told her family we were camping or something. I don't remember. And then we came back here." "What happened when they caught up with you?" "Oh, they threatened us with a lot of different things. They said they'd put me in jail," Art said. Rachel said, "I told them I was going to have a baby. I wasn't then, so they let us alone." She was pensive a moment, and then she said, "One night we were walking home. We were walking back from a show, and a police car stopped us and made Art stand up against the wall. And they asked us a lot of questions, and they pushed him around." "There's a curfew," Art said. "We were out after the curfew." For some reason, it had never occurred to him that there was a curfew for kids. "You mean they can pick you up if you're out on the street at night?" "Any kids," Art said. He and his wife nodded somberly. "And they didn't believe we were married," Rachel said. "We had to go with them in the police car to our place and show them the license. And while they were inside, in the apartment, they looked all around, you know. They sort of poked into things. I don't know what they were looking for. Just looking, I guess." "Well, what did they say?" "Nothing. They just asked us questions. They asked what I did for a living," Art said. "I'll be darned," he said. It was macabre. "There's a lot of places we can't go," Rachel said. "I mean, even though we're married. They think we're going to bust something or steal something, because we're kids. Like, one time we went into this restaurant when we were just married. I got my job, this job with the airline I have. I figure out how much tickets cost." "She's real good at math," Art said. "And we wanted to go out and have a good time, go to dinner and everything. And they asked us to leave. That was at this real nice-looking restaurant. We didn't have the right clothes," Art said. "No," she said. "I don't think that was it. If we'd had the right clothes, they wouldn't have thrown us out." He nodded vigorously. "No, it was because we were kids." Jim Briskin said, "Didn't anybody do anything? Protest or anything?" "When the police car stopped us that night," Rachel said, "a bunch of people, they were coming out of bars, I guess, stood around and watched. There was these old women, these fat old women in ratty-looking furs. They were yelling something at us. I didn't hear what it was. And," Art said, "they're always telling us what to do. Like Mr. Larson, this old guy I work for, this printer. He's always got some sort of advice. Like, one day he said to me, don't never give any credit to Negroes. He really hates Negroes, and he does business with them all the time. But he doesn't give them any credit. They have to pay cash." Rachel said, "I used to know this Negro boy, and my mother and father almost went crazy. They were afraid I might, you know, start going around with them." "Delinquents," Jim Briskin said, following her account and finding in it no humor, whether in her attitude or in the account itself. Art said, "That's what one of those old dames was yelling. Delinquents. I heard what she said." Rachel looked up at him. "Is that what they were saying? I couldn't hear. So much was happening." "It seems as if there ought to be something you can do," Jim said. "Curfews for kids. They could extend that to men in their 20s or whatever they wanted. Why not 40-year-old men with red hair?" Anybody, he thought. Whatever they wanted. Now, he thought, he was saying they. He was thinking as Art and Rachel were thinking, in terms of the unyielding they. But to him, the they would not be adults. They would be what? He pondered, drawn into this in spite of himself. Looney Luke, perhaps, or Ted Haynes, or for that matter, anyone and everyone. But nobody was keeping him out of restaurants. Nobody had halted him at night and shoved him against a wall. So it was in his mind. It was not real. For these kids, it was real enough. Civil rights, he thought. The good people talk about civil rights, the protection of minority groups. And then they passed a curfew. No children and dogs, he said. What? Art said. Oh, yeah, restaurants. He had not expected either of them to understand, but they had. The sign in the restaurant windows in the South, no niggers or dogs. But here it was not Negroes, not exclusively anyhow. Art said, Hey, how'd you get to be a disc jock? It must make you feel strange, Rachel said, to know when you say something everybody's listening. I mean, anything you say, like you always say to drive carefully. It's not as if you were just talking to one person. It's a living, he said. Don't you enjoy it? The girl's eyes, the immense dark eyes, fixed themselves on him. It must be very strange. I mean, you must feel funny. She did not seem able to make herself any clearer than that. Both of them were agitated, trying to put something across to him. The tension reached him, but not the meaning. No, he said, you get used to it. You mean if I fluff a line or something? Get a word backwards? Rachel shook her head. No, she said, and she seemed then to drop into a mood. She no longer was trying to talk to him. Art said, We better get going. We have to get home. Excuse me, Rachel said. She slid to the edge of the seat and stood up. I'll be right back. As she went off among the patrons, Jim and Art watched her. Jim said, I never realized you were married. Just for 3 months. She's very pretty. Yeah, Art said, scratching with his nail at the table. How'd you meet her? Bowling. We used to bowl. I mean, I knew her in school. And then we were in this bowling alley, me and Joe Mantilla, you know. And I saw her, and I recognized her. Rachel returned. She carried a small white paper bag, which she placed in front of Jim. For you. Opening the bag, he found she had bought him a roll, a sweet Danish pastry roll. She likes to do that, Art said, standing up beside his wife. He put his arm around her. She buys people stuff. Rachel said, Would you like to come over sometime and have dinner with us? Maybe some Sunday? We don't know an awful lot of people. Sure, he said, also getting up. Automatically, he began closing up the white paper bag. Nobody had given him a roll before. He did not know how to react. He was deeply distressed, and he wondered what he could do for them. He grasped the fact that he owed them something. Pushing back his sleeve to uncover his watch, he said, You have a car to get home in? Maybe I could... We're not going home, Rachel said. We thought maybe we'd go to a show. Thanks, Art said. Maybe some other time, he said. Casting about for something more to offer them, he said, How would that be? Okay, Art said. Rachel said, I'm very glad to have met you. It was a formal little set of words, but she gave the words an energetic push. She twisted them and squeezed them and put them forward in a carefully worked fashion. And then she said, Did you really mean that? About coming by sometime? Absolutely, he said. And he did. He watched the two of them go out of the cafe. Art walked ahead, leading her, holding onto her hand. Her movement was slow. The weight, he thought. Already she was beginning to bulge. The dress lifted out before her, and she walked with her head down, as if she were meditating. At the sidewalk they halted. They did not give the impression of going anywhere in particular, and he had a vision, an image of them wandering along the sidewalk, not noticing anybody, not aware of where they were, drifting on and on until they became tired and went home. His meal was cold, and he did not feel much like finishing. He paid his check and walked outside, across Geary Street and back to the station. The impression of Art and Rachael persisted, and he stopped in the front office, marking time before he returned to his job. Over the past years, it had been his custom to bring his preoccupations to Pat. He now approached her desk. But all the small objects on her desk were away in the drawers. Her desk was neat and barren. Pat had left the station and gone home. Was it that late? He wondered. Going into one of the back rooms, he spread out his records. He continued putting them in order for the evening program. With the records was the Looney Luke copy, and clipped to the copy were 16-inch transcription discs, which the Looney Luke people had sent over. The discs were canned commercials. He put one of them on a turntable and started the first band playing. The speaker beneath the turntable said, "Ho, ho, ho, ha, 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 hee, 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 ho, 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 ha." Jim put his hands to his ears. "Yes, sir, friends," the speaker declared. "I'm telling you one and all to come down to Looney Luke's, where you'll get yourself not only one square deal like you never heard of before, but, my friends, you'll be getting yourself a real, all-around clean car you can take out on the highway, friends, and you can drive that car, my friends, all the way to Chicago." In his mind, he saw the Kansas City announcer with his wide, empty smile, the witless smile with its hanging chin and loose lips, the tone of sincerity, faith in the overblown nonsense, in the rot gut, the giggling, vacant funhouse face that drooled and believed. He reached to lift the tone arm from the disc. "Ha, ha, ha, folks," the speaker blubbered. "Yes, that's right, ha, ha. Looney Luke will take that old ho-ho in and give you hee-hee on the line. Ha, ha." "Ha, ha," he thought, stopping the disc. His fingers slipped, and the tone arm swept across the soft plastic surface. The diamond stylus cut a path from the outer rim to the label. Now he had done it. The disc was ruined. Occupational hazard, he thought, listening to the fierce racket as the stylus scored and rescored the label. The label disintegrated, and bits of it shredded away and were tossed at him, white particles that were flung out in all directions. 3. That night, Bob Posen celebrated the Looney Luke account by giving away a valuable phonograph record from the record library of station KOIF. He had it at home, at his apartment. "I'll be happy to pay you $10 for it," Tony Vacuti said, comparing the number on the record label with the slip of paper he had brought with him. "I mean, you know, it isn't for me anyhow. What would I want with classical stuff like this? It's for a client, so I'm just going to sell it anyhow. I mean, that isn't right." Tony, an agent, solicitor, man about town, wore a respectable pinstripe suit. The night hours were his business hours. His hair was greased back and combed in place. His chin was blue with talcum powder, and the glint of his chitin-like eyes had faded and mellowed at this fine acquisition. Bob Posen said, "It didn't cost me anything. Take it." He put the record in a sleeve and then into a bag. The record was dusty and worn. It was played every week or so on the Italian language program Sunday night. The record was Giri's Che Gelida Manina, an ancient Victor pressing. "Just so it's the right one," Vacuti said. "It's the right one." He was in a good humor. "How's Thisbe?" "Now there's a girl," Tony said. Bob Posen was tempted to expand his celebration to include Thisbe. "Is she doing anything tonight, to your knowledge?" "Well, she's down at the Peach Bowl singing. You want to drop down? We could drop by. But I got business. I'll have to let you off. I mean, I can't stick around." "Wait till I change my shirt." He took off his shirt and got a clean one from the dresser drawer, a brand-new pink shirt that he had never worn. This was a special occasion. While he was changing, he turned on the Magnavox combination in the living room. Symphonic music came from the twin speakers. The dinner music program was in progress. Tony Vacuti, reading a magazine he had picked up from the coffee table, said, "You know, Thisbe cut a couple of records for Sundial, that outfit over on Columbus. Snappy tunes, but nothing right out that might start trouble, if you get my point. How about if I bring them around? You may be using them on that disc jockey show?" "Ask Briskin," he said, fixing his tie. "Maybe she could personally appear," Tony Vacuti said. "You ever do things like that? Where she ought to be is on television. Boy, that's no lie, you know." That's where we all ought to be, Posen said energetically. That's where the money's going. If you wonder why people aren't sitting in bars listening to song stylists, it's the same thing as we're up against with an independent AM radio station. What do people do? They turn on I Love Lucy, the mass morons. Sometimes 80 million people at once watch that kind of escapist trash. I wouldn't have a TV set around. The music from the radio ended. Jim Briskin's professional announcer's voice took its place. The Romeo and Juliet Overture, played by Edvard van Beinum and the London Philharmonic. For an interval, the radio was silent. I know what you mean, Tony Vacuhi said. All them people at once. Shut up a second, Posen said, smoothing his hair. Now from the radio, Jim Briskin's voice continued. The car you buy today from Looney Luke will be a clean car, and it will stay clean. Good, Bob Posen thought. He's doing it good. Looney Luke guarantees it, Briskin went on in a firm, clipped voice, a spirited delivery. Clean, 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 he said. And then, in a reflective voice, he said, No, I can't give this. I gave it during the afternoon, and that's enough. As if he was speaking to himself. He said, And now we'll hear Richard Strauss's tone poem, Till Eulenspiegel. Tony Vacuhi laughed nervously. That's funny. Symphonic music began again. Posen felt the back of his head heat up by degrees until it was scorching red. He felt as if his scalp was shriveling under waves of blasting intensity. And all the time he went on fixing his tie, smoothing his hair. He could not believe it. I can't believe it, he said. What did he say? Did he say he wasn't going to give it? I don't know, Vacuhi said, uneasily, sensing that something was wrong. Of course you know. You heard it, didn't you? What did you hear him say? Did he say he wasn't going to give it? Isn't that what he said? Something like that, Vacuhi muttered. Posen put on his coat. I have to go. You don't want to go over to the Peach Bowl and... No, I don't want to go over to the Peach Bowl. He pushed Tony Vacuhi and his record out of the apartment and slammed the door. How do you like that? He said. As the two of them went down the hall, Tony several steps behind, he repeated, How do you like that? What do you think of a thing like that? At the sidewalk, he left Tony Vacuhi and began walking aimlessly. I can't believe it, he said to himself. What do you think of a thing like that? Can a man openly do a thing like that? To his right was a drugstore. He entered the public phone booth in the rear and dialed the station. Naturally, there was no answer. At night, the announcer was alone. He worked the board by himself without an engineer. It was hopeless trying to get Briskin at night. He thought of getting his car from the garage under the apartment building and driving to the station. Leaving the drugstore, he started back up the sidewalk. A small grocery store was open. Inside, a radio played. The owner and his wife were at the counter listening to marimba music. Bob Posen stopped at the doorway and yelled, Hey, can I get something on your radio? I have to hear something. It's important. The owner and his wife, old people, stared at him. This is an emergency, he said, going inside, past the sausages and bins of peas to the counter. The radio was a tiny wooden Emerson with a trailing antenna. He rotated the knob until he found KOIF. The owner and his wife, both of them dressed in wool coats, withdrew in an injured fashion, leaving him alone with the radio. They pretended to be doing something else. They did not care what he did. Still music, he thought. The goddamn music. Thanks, he said, hurrying past them, out of the grocery store, and onto the sidewalk. Then he ran back to his own apartment. Panting, he reached his floor and searched in his pockets for his key. His Magnavox remained on. He paced back and forth as the music finished itself out. During the final coda, his impatience became a frenzy. He went into the kitchen for a drink of water. His throat was dry, burned by his agitation. He thought of all the people he could ring up. Sharpstein, Ted Haynes, Patricia Gray, the station's attorney, who was on vacation in Santa Barbara. The music ceased. He ran back into the living room. Jim Briskin's cultivated voice came on. Artur Radzinski and the Cleveland Orchestra in Richard Strauss's Till Eulenspiegel. from a Columbia Masterworks long-playing record. Then a pause, a mind-racking pause. "I guess," Jim Briskin said, "most of you have been over at Domingo's lately. You've seen the new arrangement of the tables, so you can look out over the Golden Gate while you're eating. But I can't help mentioning." He went on, describing in his usual manner the restaurant. Bob Posen picked up the telephone and called Patricia Gray. "Listen," he said, "did you hear Briskin tonight? Do you have your radio on?" Now the music had returned. Patricia said, "Yes, I was listening." "Well?" "I listened." "Did you hear anything?" Her tone was obscure. He could not pin it down. "I guess I heard." "The Looney Luke commercial," he shouted into the phone. His voice bounced back at him, deafening him. "Oh," she said. "Did you hear it? What the hell was he doing? Is it my imagination?" "That's what he said, isn't it? He said he was fed up and he wasn't going to read it. He was tired of reading it." He got nothing out of her. Disgusted, he slammed down the phone and went back to pacing in front of the radio. But still the music continued, and still he had to phone somebody. He tried the station again, without results. In his mind he pictured Jim Briskin at the microphone, in the green swivel chair, with the records, turntables, scripts, and tape transport before him, showing no emotion as the red light that indicated the phone blinked on and off. Standing before his Magnavox radio, Posen realized that he was never going to find out, never going to be sure. He would never get hold of Briskin if he phoned and waited 1,000 years. The radio would continue playing music, and he would never hear Looney Luke mentioned again, and it would be nothing but a conjecture of his memory. Already he was losing the sense of conviction. "God damn," he said. The telephone at station KOIF was still ringing as Jim Briskin shut the equipment down for the night. The time was 12 midnight. The street outside was less active. Many of the neon signs were off. The stairs were dismal as he descended floor by floor to the lobby of the McLaughlin building. Under his arm was his regular packet of records. They had been borrowed from record shops, and tomorrow they went back into stock. The night air was thin and cold. He took a full breath. On the sidewalk, he started in the direction of the station's parking lot, but a car at the curb honked. The door opened, and a woman's voice said from far off, "Jim, over here." He walked toward the car. Drops of night mist gleamed on the fenders and hood. "Hello," he said to her. Patricia switched on the headlights and started up the engine. "I'll drive you," she said. She had her heavy cloth coat bundled around her, buttoned and tucked under her legs. In the cold, her face was pinched. "I have my own car. It's in the lot." He did not feel like company. "We can just drive around then." "Why?" But he got in. The upholstery was icy as he adjusted his packet of records beside him. She drove the car out into traffic among the other cars. Neon signs and headlights sparkled, colors in a variety of sizes. Words flashing on and off. "I phoned the station," she said presently, "but you didn't answer." "Why should I answer? It's either somebody complaining or somebody with a request. I only have the records I brought. I have to play what I planned to play." She listened to his short burst of resentment without visible reaction. He saw no response. What a bleak expression, he thought. How set her face was. "What's with you?" he said. "Why this?" "I listened," she said. Now her eyes were fixed on him, unwinking, wet. "I heard what you said about the Looney Luke commercial. You must have practiced a long time to say it like that." "I didn't practice. I started to read it, and then I gave up." She said, "I see." "It's the only way I know," he said. "These guys who work in factories throw their shoes into the machinery." "Is that what you're doing?" "I guess it's lousy." "I wouldn't say lousy. Dangerous is what I would say. Fatal, if you want to know what I think." He said, "You were the one who didn't want me to read the thing." She closed her eyes for a moment. "Watch the traffic," he said. "That's not what I wanted you to do. I wanted you to make some sort of rational protest. Well, It doesn't matter now. No, he said. I guess it doesn't. What are you going to do? I can get a job easily enough. I know people in the area. If I have to, I can go to the East Coast. You don't think this will follow you? There's an announcer, Jim said, who today has a half-hour TV show coast to coast, who once on a network radio show told his listeners to pour Jergens lotion in their hair. He was so crocked he could barely stagger through the show. And it was only a 15-minute show. What are your plans? Do you have anything worked out? I just want to go home and go to bed. She made a right turn and brought the car around in front of the McLaughlin building once more. Look, go get your car and follow me. And we'll both go have a drink at your place or my place. You think I'm going to go berserk? He said. And maybe listen to old Mengelberg records. She went on as if he had not spoken. What old Mengelberg records? Those old worn-out clunks we built our marriage on? Broodingly, he said, I guess you did get most of them. You kept Les Préludes, she said, which was the only one either of us really wanted. And he had kept the Leonora No. 3, but she didn't know about that. During the vindictive days of dividing up their possessions, under the California Joint Property Settlement Act, he had told her fables, and one of the fables was that the records in the album were broken. Sat on, he had said, one night at a party. She had done the sitting on a whole chairful of albums. Sure, he said. Why not? He went to his car, started it up, and in it followed Pat's cream and blue Dodge up Geary Street, past Van Ness, and then up the hill on the far side. Ahead of him, the taillights of the Dodge blinked red, massive coils like the turrets of a pinball machine. He could not see her. He followed the taillights of her car. Here and there, he thought. Wherever she went, uphill and down, like a child's fantasy of faith. And so, he thought, they lived happily ever after, the two of them in their cottage on the side of the hill, the two of them in their candy bar home where nobody could find them. The Dodge stopped. Its brake lights blazed warningly, and he wondered where he was. He had lost track of the streets. The Dodge's turn signal blinked, and the car turned left. He followed. The Dodge was at the curb, and he almost went on past. He heard the sound of her horn at the instant he realized she had stopped. How few times, he thought, he had been here to this apartment. The location, the address were shut out of his mind, as if the place did not exist. Twisting his neck, he began to back the car against traffic. The Dodge was directly beside his car, and now he was pulling behind it, parking parallel to it. The red taillights dazzled him. A variety of lights, turn lights, brake lights, white backup lights. They made his head hurt. The gaudy bedroom and chrome cars, he thought. Carpets and record players. He shut off his headlights, rolled up his windows, and stepped out onto the sidewalk. Pat stood shivering, her arms folded as he locked his doors. It's the fog, she said, as they walked up the broad concrete steps of the apartment building. The door was bronze and glass, locked. They had to wait while she found her key. The hall inside was soundless. On each side of them the doors were shut. Everyone here, he thought, believed in the good, solid things of life. To bed at 11, up at 6. Trustingly, he went along after her, letting her find the right door. She seemed to know. Her long, dark hair bounced at the collar of her coat as she trotted over the carpet. Her heels made no sound. Like a long vault, he thought, a passage into the side of the mountain. The door was open, and she was inside the apartment, switching on the lights. As she reached to pull down the window shades, he said, "These big apartment houses, they're clammy." "Oh, no," she said matter-of-factly. "It would bother me, each person retiring to his sealed chamber." Still in her coat, she bent to light the heater. "You're just full of morbid images." Going to the closet, she took off her coat and hung it on a hanger. "You know, in some ways, you're rational, and in other ways you're erratic, and nobody can tell what you're going to do. You just stand there with a blank look, and nobody can reach you or get across to you. And then finally, when we've all exhausted ourselves talking and waving our hands in front of your face..." She closed the door to the hall, The door banged. Then you suddenly come to life and start charging everything in sight. He went into the tiny, clean, sparkling kitchen to see about drinks. In the refrigerator was a bowl of potato salad. When Pat came in, she found him eating the potato salad from the bowl with a soup spoon he had pulled out of the sink. "Oh, God," she said. Lines formed about her eyes and spread like minute cracks to her lips and chin. "You make me feel like crying." "Old times?" he said. "No, I don't know." She blew her nose. "I hope for your sake you can survive this. I'll do what I can to smooth it over at the station. I think I can talk to Haynes better than you or Bob Posen." "You're a great one to smooth," he said. She said, "All right, and you might consider this. You talk about going to another station. Do you think you'll get away from Looney Luke? That stuff is on all the independents and on the network AM stations and on TV. I heard it the other night late on TV, after the movie. So what good will it do? Are you going to quit when they give you Looney Luke commercials? And are you going to confine it to Looney Luke? Why just Looney Luke? What about the bread commercials and the beer commercials? Why be arbitrary? Don't read any of them. Isn't that so? Aren't you being arbitrary? And you pretend I wanted you to do something like this. I'm somehow responsible." She was yelling at him in a little high-pitched shrill whistle of a voice, her old domestic argument voice. "Isn't that right? Aren't you trying to pretend it's my fault? I put you up to this or something? God knows what. You know this wasn't what I meant. I wanted you to do something rational. Show Haynes it wouldn't go on the dinner music program. You say you started to read it, and then you just gave up? Why did you give up? Why did you have to say that over the air? Why couldn't you just not have started it? You can't say things like that over the air. You can't say you won't read it. You're tired of reading it." "Take it easy," he said. "This finishes you," she said. "God, I had such high hopes for you, and you're winding up nowhere at all. Just because you couldn't go out and meet this rationally, and go to Haynes and discuss it before you went on the air. No, you had to wait until you had the script in your hands and you were alone in the station, and maybe then you felt safe. You could get away with it. And then you opened your mouth and fucked up the script so that God knows what sort of grief we're in for. Maybe a lawsuit, maybe a fine by the FCC. And what about your music? What about the 5 years you worked fixing it up with them so you could play classical music, whatever you liked? They even let you pick it out and call it your show, like Club 17. Are you just going to junk that? Isn't that what this is all about? Weren't you trying to protect that in the first place? Isn't that why you didn't want to read the commercial? You didn't want to offend the old ladies, and now you just throw away the whole program, much more than reading it would have. I don't understand you. I can't make any sense out of it." "Okay," he said. 5 years, she said. Wasted, thrown away. As he figured it, he had put at least 10 years into the hopper getting this far. First, there were the 4 years at Cal getting his B.A. in the music department under Elkis, the counterpoint in composing. Then the 2 postgraduate years, doing a little conducting, singing, a so-so baritone, in their own group, the Marin Choral Singers, writing a moribund cantata dealing with peace among nations and the like. Then his fine job at the NBC Music Library, the big move to San Francisco, away from the university. 11 years, he decided. Lord, it was almost 12. He had first gone on the air as a private record collector, a discophile, as the term had it, and his easy delivery, his lack of snobbishness and pedagoguery, had put his program over long after the notion of inviting collectors had withered. He had a natural radio personality. He talked spontaneously, directly, without the customary rhetoric of the classical music fancier. And most important of all, he liked all kinds of music, classical and pop and moldy fig jazz and progressive Los Angeles jump. He said, "No, I didn't do it to get away from Luke." "What then?" she said. "To get away from you." Or maybe to get closer to you. Probably both. It's intolerable as it stands. Seeing you every day at the station. Do you realize a couple of years ago you and I were married? Remember that? I remember, she said. What a diabolical business. She said, like, who was it? Somebody. Somebody in a myth, separated by the winds of hell. It's your own fault, is it? He said. It's the same kind of thing, this purposeless wandering activity. Plus, he said, the slides-in doctor. What was his name? McIntosh? Yes, she said. McIntosh. Plus what you couldn't see letting happen because it might wound your vanity. It might have made you feel superfluous. There's no point in arguing it out now, he said. No, she agreed. He said, the only thing I don't understand is the picture I get, probably inaccurate. But I see you sitting around the place that Saturday afternoon by yourself, meditating everything over rationally in your mind, and then, click, you had it worked out. As calm and cold-blooded as... He lifted his hands. I thought it over for months, she said. But you came to your conclusion like an IBM machine. And then, he thought, after that, there was no talking to her. No arguing, no discussing. Not after her mind was made up. Their marriage had been a mistake, and the next question had to do with how to divide up the joint possessions and how to get the thing through court as cheaply and simply as possible. The hiring of mutual friends, he thought, that was the really evil part, sending them down, picking them up in the car and driving them down, to the courthouse, to testify to the travesty he and she had invented. What a pitiless time that had been. Across from him, Pat said, The phone's ringing. What? He said. It was, but he had not even heard it. Still ringing, even here at her apartment. So it is, he said, glancing around. I'll get it. She disappeared into the living room. Hello? He heard her say. He opened the refrigerator and examined the unopened fifth of Gilby's gin. Excellent stuff. And a cheap vermouth. And a pint of vodka, and wine of every description. The Gothic script on the label of a My Vine bottle attracted him, and he began to translate the German. Pat appeared in the kitchen doorway. It's Ted Haynes. He went stiff-legged into the living room. Does he want me? He wants to know if you're here. She had her hand over the receiver, but he had never believed in that. He knew that the other person could still hear. They got the sound through the bakelite, as the deaf person got sound through the bones of his skull. Sure I'm here, he said. Pat said, He's so mad he can hardly talk. Well, he said, still holding the bottle of German wine, I guess Posen must have called him. Don't blame Bob, she said. The phone dipped, and he took it from her. Don't blame him or me. When he took the phone, Haynes's voice said hoarsely in his ear, Jim, a man named Sharpstein called me just now here at my home and said they're canceling. And if they ever see our sales representative near their lots, they'll call the police and have him thrown into the street. Sharpstein, he said. He must represent them or something. What's his first name, Luke? I'd like to see you in the next half hour, preferably at the station. Or if you feel you can't make it down there again on your own time, I'll meet you where you are now. You're at Pat's apartment. That's not very far from where I am. If you're going to be there for a while, I'll drop over and we can settle this on the spot. His brain was too fuzzy. He could not follow what Haynes was saying. If you want, he said. I want you to call Bob Posen and ask him to come over so he can be present. It isn't essential, but he's more familiar with the union rulings than I am. I have no time to memorize that sort of business. I have too many other important things on my mind to waste my time with that. All right, then. I'll see you where you are now in about 15 minutes. Goodbye, Jim said. The phone clicked first, before he was able to get the receiver down. He felt childishly defeated. Did they hear? Pat said. Did the Luke people hear? He said, I have to call Bob Posen. As he reached to take up the telephone book, Pat said, It's on the cover, by the corner. Oh? He said with rage. You keep it handy? Yes, I keep it handy. What's this? He demanded. What do you mean, what's this? Oh, my God. She walked out of the living room. A door slammed, probably the bathroom door. He stood a moment, and then he dialed Bob Poson's number. There was only the one brief buzz, and then Poson's voice saying, "Hello?" "This is Jim Briskin," he said. "Oh, did Haynes get hold of you?" "Yes." "He wanted to get hold of you." Poson's voice had a muted quality, as if his own rancor had been punctured, as if Jim thought, now that Haynes had come onto the scene, Bob Poson was bowing out. "Say," Poson said, "that was quite a stunt you pulled tonight." "Tell me," Jim said, "how did the loop people get into it? Were they listening?" "Yes, as a matter of fact, they were. Just a minute." A long minute, and then Poson was back. I had a cigarette going. "Say, well, apparently they were gathered around the radio. Can't hear enough of their own bilge, I suppose. Something on that order. He must really have hit the roof. I got this all second-hand, of course. He, Luke Sharpstein, I mean, called Haynes, and Haynes got hold of me. He was looking for you. By that time, you had left the station." Jim said, "I'm over at Pat's." "I see," Poston said. "Well, how about that?" "Haynes told me to call you," Jim said. "You're supposed to be here. He's coming over in 15 minutes or so." "What's he want me around for?" "To hold the bowl, I guess. You know, the bowl under the neck after they make the cut." "I'll see you then," Jim said, and hung up. This time he was the first to get the phone onto the hook. Pat had come back out of the bathroom. She was in the process of fixing her hair, putting it up for the night. "Did you tell him to come here?" She seemed to have settled down a trifle. Her voice was less uneven. "It's almost 1 o'clock. "Not my idea," he said. "Haynes is coming too, both of them." "Now I'll tell you exactly what to say," she said. "I was working it out while you were talking." "More smoothing," he said. "You tell them, yes, of course, you stopped in the middle of the commercial. You admit they heard you. But here's why you did it. You decided a lot of entertainers like Arthur Godfrey and Steve Allen and all those have been more successful with an—" "Okay," he said. "I'll tell Sharpstein and Haynes and Poson that. I'll tell them I wanted to be another Henry Morgan. Remember him?" "Yes," she said. "It's hard to," he said. "It really takes you back." She said, "Henry Morgan is on television. He's on the Gary Moore Show. Every week." Shrugging, Jim said, "It doesn't matter. I have nothing to tell them. Let's just get it over. I'm sorry it has to be here in your apartment. That wasn't my idea." She stood considering, meditating. Then she returned to the bathroom and resumed what she was doing to her hair. He remembered the nightly setting, the metal clips, the cloth, the smell of shampoo and wave lotion, the bottles and cotton pads. Her back to him, she said, "Can I ask you something?" "Okay," he said. Her hands worked methodically at the base of her skull, lifting her hair, sorting, massaging, putting the hair in place. "Do you want me to quit my job? Would you feel easier if I left the station?" "Too late for that now." "I could." She turned toward him. "I've been giving a great deal of thought to that. I might anyhow, no matter how this turns out." He had no answer for that. Sitting down on the couch, he waited for Bob Poson and Haynes. "Do you understand what I'm talking about?" she said. "Sure, I understand. You want to get married. Don't they all want to get married? But this time make sure. Get him up to Dr. McIntosh and get the slides going." It was the meanest thing he could think of, the bitterest remark. Pat said, "I'm fairly sure." 4. Haynes entered the apartment several minutes ahead of Bob Poson. He was a small, rather delicately built gentleman, in his 60s, with luminous white hair and a thin, celluloid-like nose, a nose without bone. The veins on the backs of his hands stood out, blue and distended. His skin was mottled by liver spots, and his walk was the half-shuffle of the elderly professional man. "Good evening," he said to Patricia. His voice was shaded with elegance. Jim thought of a conductor on a southern railroad, a rigid old conductor with pocket watch and shiny, black, narrow-pointed shoes. "Where's Bob?" Pat asked. A heavy, damp towel was wrapped around her head, elongating her skull, obscuring her hair. She supported the towel with one hand. "Parking his car," Haynes said. To Jim he said, "The first thing to get settled is, do you want to continue working for KOIF, or was this a method of telling us that you intend to leave?" The question bowled him over. "It sounds as if it's up to me," he said. "Do you want to leave the station?" He said, "No." "What is it then? The summer? Thinking about fishing in the mountains?" At the door, Bob Posen knocked, pushed the door open to look in. "Hard to park," he said, entering. He had on a yellow Aloha sports shirt hanging out at his waist, and Dacron slacks. His hair was uncombed, and he looked seedy and harried. "Then that's settled," Haynes continued. "As far as I'm concerned, you're a fair enough announcer. We've never had any complaints about you up to now." "I'll resign," Jim said, "if you want." "No, we don't want you to resign," Haynes said. His hands behind his back, he went over to the corner of the room and looked at something hanging from the ceiling. "What's this?" He touched it circumspectly. "Is this what they call a mobile? The first one I ever saw made out of... What is this? Eggshells?" "You want the truth?" Pat said. "I'll be darned," Haynes said, scrutinizing the mobile. "You made this yourself? Very clever." Pat said, "I'm going to have to go to bed. I have to be at the station at 8 a.m. tomorrow morning. Excuse me." She disappeared into the bedroom. At the door, she stopped momentarily. "You didn't want to ask me anything about all this, did you?" she said to Mr. Haynes. "No, I guess not. Thanks. We'll try to keep the voices down." "Good night," she said. The bedroom door closed after her. Ted Haynes threw himself down on the couch and faced Jim Briskin and Bob Posen, his hands on his knees. After an interval, Posen also seated himself. Jim did so too. "You know," Haynes said, "I've been thinking, maybe TV would be the thing you ought to go into." He was addressing Jim. His tone was considerate, the Southerner's tone, the voice of a gentleman. "Ever give any thought to that?" Jim shook his head. "I've heard one of the network TV stations is looking for a disc jockey to put up against Don Sherwood. Same sort of thing, talk and spot plugs, interviewing singers and entertainers. No records, just live talent from the Bay Area. People appearing at the different spots." "Sherwood's too good," Jim said shortly. That settled that. Scratching the side of his nose, Haynes said, "How about a more secluded job that would get you away from the bustle and pressure of the city, long enough for you to think things over and straighten out your mind? You might like it. The reason I say that is that somebody the other day told me that one of the Valley stations, Fresno or Dixon, someplace like that, is looking for a combination man." "Then you do want me to resign," Jim said. "No, I don't want you to resign. I just want to find out what's the matter with you." "Nothing," he said. "How does this sound, then?" Haynes said. "I'm going to put you on 1 month's suspension without pay, subject to the approval of the union. At the end of that time, you come into the station and tell us if you want to keep working for us, or if you want to call it quits, and we'll part friends and you can go on to something else, whatever you want." Jim said, "Suits me." "Fine," Haynes said. "You haven't had your vacation yet this year, have you? Suppose, then, we give you a check for what you've worked this month up to now, plus pay instead of the vacation, so it won't hit so hard in the pocketbook." He nodded. "Shall we say starting tomorrow?" Haynes said. "Your shift begins at 2, doesn't it? I'll have Flannery come in and take it. I suppose either Flannery or Hubble." "It doesn't matter," he said. "Either of them can handle it." "How do you feel about this?" Haynes said. "Does it meet with your approval?" He shrugged. "Why not? Sure, it meets with my approval." He went unsteadily into the kitchen and began fixing himself a drink. "Anything for you?" "Too late at night," Haynes said. He brought out his watch. "You know what I think that mobile is made out of?" he was saying to Posen as Jim got ice cubes from the refrigerator. He stood alone in the kitchen, drinking. In the living room, Haynes was talking. "There's only one thing you can be sure of. What sells soap today stinks tomorrow. There's no charity in the industry. You take somebody like Sherwood. They're reading him out on a string. A fair question would be, does he know it? Or does he think he's getting away with something? Nobody's going to pay his bills when he stops selling. He's just a new way to sell. A new way, Posen said, with the illusion of independence. A trend, Posen said. If you wish, a trend. But suppose he really knocked the sponsors. Suppose he stopped smiling as he spills the, Falstaff beer? Then they yank him. Of course, the problem is that nobody really knows what they want. They're all confused. The whole industry is confused. You can say that again, Posen's voice sounded. Sherwood is riding on a crest. They're trying him out. If Sherwood went up to the wheels at ABC and said, "What is it you really want me to do?" they wouldn't be able to tell him. They'd be able to tell him, "You sell soap," Posen said. Yes, they could tell him that, but they wouldn't. Pragmatic, Posen was saying, as Jim finished his drink and poured himself a second. What happened to Briskin? Posen's voice said, he went into the kitchen. Well, go see if he's all right. Appearing, Posen said, Are you okay? Sure, Jim said. Leaning against the moist tile of the sink, he drank down his drink. I think the 30-day business is a good all-around solution, Posen said. You do? Jim said. End of side 1. To continue, turn the cassette over.